You know, after nearly 70 years on this earth, I thought I'd seen it all. Turns out, life still has surprises left for an old guy like me. My name is Walter Bennett, and just 3 days ago, my entire world changed in a way I never saw coming. It happened in Cedar Falls, Iowa, on a cloudy April afternoon. I'd just returned from a weekend trip up at Lake Superior, my yearly escape for a bit of fishing and peace. I pulled my battered old Ford F-150 up to the curb of what used to be my home. Only, instead of a welcome, I found chaos. There it was, my life, stacked in ragged boxes next to the city dumpster, the contents spilling out like someone had tipped over 40 years of memories just to see what would break. There was my wedding photo, Joan's smile, cracked right across the glass. My old army duffel, split open, metals mixed in with socks and worn-out tools. The watch she gave me on our 25th, lying face down in a puddle. My fishing tackle, snapped and scattered, hooks tangled with a bent spatula and faded Christmas cards. I just stood there, staring, my hands still gripping the steering wheel, heart hammering in my chest. It couldn't be real. My knees creaked as I got out, boots crunching gravel. I picked up the watch, ruined, waterlogged, probably done for. I found Joan's locket in the dirt, mud caked around the chain. Her ring, meant for Emily, my granddaughter one day, tossed next to a crushed soda can. My name was still written in her script on some of the boxes, the ink blurred by drizzle. For a second, I tried to believe it was a mistake. Surely someone made a mistake. But nobody makes a mistake this big. I took a step back, looking at the house. All the windows were dark. The porch swing where I used to watch fireflies with my grandson, Noah, was gone. The door mat, "Home Sweet Home," rolled up and stuffed in the trash. I tried the front door. My key, the one I'd carried for 15 years, wouldn't budge. They'd changed the lock. My hands were shaking now, anger and hurt swirling together. I pulled out my phone. My son Brian would explain, I thought. He'd pick up and say there was some misunderstanding. The call rang through to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Brian Bennett. Leave a message." I tried my daughter-in-law, Tina. Straight to voicemail, her message quick and clipped. I felt like a ghost standing there on my own porch. I'd helped them buy this place when they couldn't qualify, spent my retirement savings to cover the down payment. Paid bills, fixed leaks, watched their kids so they could work late. All for this. For the pleasure of seeing my belongings tossed like rubbish, my home locked up against me. The street was quiet, like nobody wanted to admit what had happened. Neighbors peeking out, then quickly pulling the curtains. Even old Frank, who'd borrowed my snowblower every winter, kept his distance. I tried sitting down on a lawn chair pulled from the trash pile. My phone buzzed, just a spam message from the pharmacy, not my family. I tried calling Brian again, then Tina. Nothing. No answer, no explanation. Hours passed. The sky turned purple, streetlights blinked on, and still I waited. At last, a familiar car pulled up, Brian's Chevy, with Tina at the wheel. They stepped out, looking tired but not surprised to see me. "What's going on?" I asked, standing up, gesturing at the mess. "Why are my things outside? Why can't I get in?" Tina didn't even look at me. She opened the trunk, pulled out grocery bags, and said, "You're not needed here anymore, Walter." Just like that. Like I was an employee who'd outlived his usefulness. Brian shuffled his feet, eyes glued to the pavement. "Sorry, Dad. It just wasn't working anymore. We need our own space," he mumbled, voice hollow. My heart pounded in my ears. "This is my house. I paid for it." Tina cut me off with a tight smile. "You paid it off, yes. But now it's time for you to go. You're old, you make noise, you take up space. We want our lives back." I tried to reach Brian, tried to find that little boy who once begged me to teach him baseball. But all I saw was a man I barely recognized, shoulders slumped, hands in his pockets, silent as a stone. I asked, "Where am I supposed to go?" Tina shrugged. "That's your problem. Don't come back. And don't try the door, or we'll call the police." She flicked off the porch light. The door slammed. I stood there, alone in the cold, heart shattered but suddenly burning with a strange, hard resolve. They thought they could throw me out like trash, erase me, and get away with it. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. That night, I slept in my truck, right there in front of the house I'd built for my family. It wasn't the first time I'd slept rough. Army training sticks with you, but there's nothing colder than watching your own living room lights click on from the outside. I wrapped my coat tighter and tried not to think about how I'd gotten here. All those years, birthdays, holidays, scraped knees, and lost teeth, washed away like sidewalk chalk in the rain. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I gathered up what I could save: Joan's locket, Noah's old baseball mitt, the stack of faded Polaroids, a few work shirts. Some things I left behind. The TV was cracked, the recliner ruined. Let them have it, I thought. Let them have the shell. The memories were mine. I drove to the one place in Cedar Falls I knew would be open early, the Twin Pines Diner. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and pancakes hit me like a memory. I took a booth by the window. The waitress, Ellie, had served me more cups of joe than I could count. She glanced at my rumpled clothes and puffy eyes, but didn't ask. She just poured the coffee, left the pot, and gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I still had my pension, a little cash stashed away from odd jobs, and crucially, every scrap of paperwork I'd ever bothered to keep. Brian and Tina had underestimated an old man's ability to hoard receipts. As I sipped the bitter coffee, I sorted through the files in my battered briefcase. Mortgage statements. Tax bills. The original deed, Joan's handwriting on the envelope. All in my name. Suddenly, I realized something important. Brian and Tina weren't on any of it. No co-signer, no secondary owner, no rental agreement. They'd always treated me like a guest in my own house, but legally, they were the guests. I finished my breakfast and drove straight to the county courthouse. I might be a grandpa, but I knew how to follow a paper trail. The records clerk, a bored-looking guy in a Hawks sweatshirt, took one look at my folder and whistled. "You've got everything here, Mr. Bennett. What do you need?" "I want to know, who owns 143 Maple Lane?" I said, voice steady. He tapped at the computer, then spun the screen around for me to see. There it was, Walter L. Bennett, sole owner. A feeling like sunlight broke through my chest. For the first time since I saw my life on the curb, I felt hope instead of defeat. I could fix this. I could get justice. But first I needed advice. I called my old friend Charlie Morgan, a retired lawyer who spent most of his days at the American Legion Post. Charlie was a tough old bird, the kind of guy who never let go of a fight if he knew he was right. I found him over a game of dominoes, still sharp as a tack. When I told him what had happened, his eyes flashed with anger. "They kicked you out of your own house?" he growled. "Well, they're about to get a lesson in property law, my friend." He helped me draft a formal letter, demand for immediate possession, with a reminder that any attempt to deny entry or remove property was a violation of the law. Charlie even drove back with me, just to make sure I didn't lose my nerve. That afternoon, I walked up to the front door, my front door, and knocked. No answer. I taped the letter to the window, right next to a "Welcome" sign that now felt like a bad joke. Charlie nodded, satisfied. "Give it a day. If they don't respond, we'll talk to the sheriff." I spent the rest of the day at the city library, reading up on Iowa's eviction laws and landlord rights. I was tired, but each word I read made me stronger. All those years of being dismissed, of having my advice ignored, of being told I was just in the way, it all faded as I remembered I'd built that life. I built this family. And if I had to, I'd build a new life, too. Evening fell, and I returned to my truck. I stared up at the windows of my house, lights spilling out onto the yard. I could almost see Joan's silhouette in the kitchen, humming while she cooked. For a moment, I let myself miss her, miss the warmth, the laughter. But then I squared my shoulders. She wouldn't want me to give up. Joan always said, "Walt, you're tougher than you look." I smiled for the first time in days, a real, stubborn smile. Tomorrow, I'd go see the sheriff. And then, I'd see what Brian and Tina had to say for themselves, when the law was on my side for once. They thought they could erase me. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next morning, I was waiting outside the Black Hawk County Sheriff's office before they unlocked the doors. It was a gray, damp morning, but I felt a spark of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The deputy at the desk, tall kid, probably just out of college, looked up from his coffee. "Help you, sir?" I told him everything, how I'd come home to find my life dumped by the curb, how my son and daughter-in-law had changed the locks and shut me out, how the house was legally mine. He listened quietly, then took my paperwork and disappeared into the back for a good 10 minutes. When he returned, he brought another officer, older, heavier, with a no-nonsense look that reminded me of the army sergeant who once yelled me through basic training. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "from what I see here, you're the sole owner of the property. What you're describing is not just a family dispute. It could be considered unlawful eviction and destruction of property. You have options." Options. I liked the sound of that. The officer walked me through the steps. I could file for immediate eviction. I could report the loss and destruction of my things. Or, if I wanted to handle it quietly, I could have the sheriff's office serve a formal demand for them to vacate. "People don't like it when a squad car pulls up in front of their house," he said with a grin. I signed the paperwork right then and there. The officer assured me someone would deliver the notice within 24 hours. "Hang tight, Mr. Bennett. You're not alone." That afternoon, I drove across town to a cheap motel, the kind where the neon vacancy sign never seemed to turn off. It was no home, but it had a bed and a bathroom and, bless them, a decent pot of coffee in the lobby. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I thought about everything I'd lost, but also everything I still had, my wits, my name, and the will to stand up for myself. The phone rang just after sunset. It was Charlie. "Walt, you won't believe it," Brian called me. "Said there's a sheriff's notice taped to the door, and he's furious. Wants to talk." I could hear the satisfaction in Charlie's voice. "Let him stew," I said. "Let him wonder what's next." But a part of me wanted to hear what Brian would say, faced with the reality that the old man he tossed aside wasn't as powerless as he looked. I told Charlie I'd meet Brian in a public place, not at the house. No more drama on their terms. We picked Riverside Park, a spot with a picnic table and plenty of room for tempers to cool. When I got there, Brian was already waiting. He looked terrible, haggard, eyes red, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Dad, what are you trying to do?" he demanded, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago, stand up for myself," I said quietly. "You and Tina locked me out of my own house. You put my life in the trash." He shook his head. "Tina says you were making it impossible to live there. That you didn't respect boundaries. You're too old-fashioned, Dad. Times have changed." My hands trembled, not with fear, but with anger I tried to keep in check. "Maybe times have changed, Brian, but respect hasn't. After all I've done for you, this is how you thank me?" He stared at the ground. "It wasn't supposed to go like this." "Well, it did. And now you and Tina need to find somewhere else to live. The law's on my side, son." For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, his voice cracked. "Where will we go?" I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered the cold look on Tina's face, the way she said I wasn't needed. That's not my problem anymore, Brian. You made your choices. I left him there, staring out at the river, and walked back to my truck. I felt lighter, stronger than I had in months. I'd been pushed out, thrown away, made to feel invisible. But I was still here, and for the first time in years, I was making my own decisions. Back at the motel, I called Charlie and thanked him. You did the right thing, Walt, he said. It's about time someone taught them that family isn't just a free ride. As I lay in the motel bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Joan. I imagined her smiling, proud of the stubborn old man she'd married. For the first time in a long while, I slept soundly, dreaming of new beginnings, not bitter endings. Tomorrow, I'd see if Brian and Tina had the decency to face me one last time before the sheriff arrived. If not, I'd start over, on my terms, with my dignity intact. They thought they could erase me. But I was Walter Bennett, and I was just getting started. The morning after my talk with Brian, I checked out of the Cedar Inn, loaded my battered suitcase into the F-150, and headed back toward Maple Lane. The town was waking up, joggers dodging puddles, kids at the bus stop, the local radio station playing Johnny Cash and reading out Lost Dog reports. I was nervous, I won't lie. But mostly, I was determined. It was time to take my life back, piece by piece. I parked across the street from my old house and watched. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd catch Brian and Tina slipping out early, but the only movement was the flag on the porch, barely stirring in the Iowa wind. I waited, heart pounding, until I saw the sheriff's cruiser pull up. A uniformed deputy, Officer Carter, got out, a clipboard in hand and a kind look on his face. He nodded at me. Mr. Bennett ready? As I'll ever be, I replied. Together, we crossed the street. Carter knocked firmly on the door. At first, nothing. Then Tina's voice, sharp as ever, came through the glass. Who is it? Sheriff's office, ma'am. We have legal notice here for immediate possession. Please open up. A pause. Then the door swung open. Tina stood there, arms folded, a forced smile on her face. Brian was behind her, shoulders sagging, eyes not meeting mine. The deputy handed over the papers. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Mr. Bennett is the legal owner. Any attempt to interfere will be considered trespassing. Tina read the letter, lips pressed thin. This is a mistake. You can't just throw us out. We've lived here for years. Officer Carter kept his voice even. You're not listed on the deed or mortgage. You're guests. Your guest rights have ended. Brian finally looked at me, and for a second, the old fear and regret flickered across his face. Dad, please. I shook my head. You made your choice, Brian. I won't argue anymore. The deputy led me inside. The house looked different, my recliner gone, family pictures replaced by Tina's farmhouse decorations, the air smelling of some new candle instead of Joan's vanilla. I walked through the living room, head held high, and retrieved what few items they hadn't trashed. My toolbox was still in the garage, thank goodness. My old Bible, the one Joan gave me on our first Christmas, was shoved on a shelf in the laundry room, but it was safe. Tina hovered, arms crossed. Where do you expect us to go, Walter? We have jobs here, the kids' schools. I stared at her, the woman who'd told me I wasn't needed, and felt nothing but cold resolve. That's for you and Brian to figure out. I gave you years, Tina. Years. You didn't want a family, you wanted a sponsor. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not anger, not annoyance, fear. The realization that sometimes, consequences are real. The deputy finished his business and gave me a card. If you need us, call. We'll make sure the transition goes smoothly. After they left, I sat in the empty kitchen, listening to the echo of silence where laughter used to be. I was alone again. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to answer to anyone. There was pain, sure, but there was freedom too. That evening, I moved what was left of my life into a tiny, one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. The landlord, Mrs. King, an elderly widow with a sharp tongue and a soft heart, welcomed me. "You're not the first grandpa to start over here," she said, patting my shoulder. "Make yourself at home. Fresh start's good for the soul." I unpacked Joan's locket, the old photos, and my Bible. The apartment was quiet, but it was mine. I sat on the new, used couch, stared out at the parking lot lights, and let the weight of the day settle. I wondered how Brian and Tina were feeling now, if regret had finally replaced entitlement. I spent the next day organizing my papers, meeting with Sandra from Walsh Realty about listing the house, and having coffee with Charlie at the Legion. Charlie slapped my back. "You did it, Walt. You didn't just take what life handed you, you handed it right back." I smiled. "Feels strange, Charlie." "Strange, but right." That night, as I drifted to sleep in a room filled with only my memories, I realized something. When one door closes, you really can open another, if you're brave enough to turn the key. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next phase was about to begin, and this time, I wasn't the only one facing the consequences. For the next 48 hours, the house on Maple Lane was a whirlwind of movement and noise. I watched from my apartment window as Brian and Tina loaded their SUV with boxes, each trip heavier than the last. Every time I glimpsed them, I saw less of the confidence they'd once had and more of the panic that comes when life slips out of your control. Word got around town quick. Small towns are like that. At the gas station, the cashier, bless her, she'd known me since Joan was alive, asked if it was true what happened. "I always thought Brian was a good boy," she said, "but you deserve better." Even the mailman gave me a nod and an extra-wide smile. For years, I'd been invisible in my own home. Now, suddenly, people remembered I existed. Charlie kept in touch. "You ready for the next step, Walt?" he asked. "Sandra has some buyers lined up already. Cedar Falls is a seller's market these days. You might get more for the place than you ever dreamed." It was a strange feeling, letting go of that old house. I'd put so much sweat into every board and nail, painted the walls myself, fixed the porch, planted the maple tree out front with Brian when he was barely big enough to hold a shovel. But looking at it now, empty and echoing, I realized I'd already said goodbye long before they tossed me out. 2 days later, the sheriff came back, this time with an eviction notice for Brian and Tina. They tried to argue, Tina especially, but the law is the law. The sheriff handed me the keys in front of them both. "You're the owner, Mr. Bennett," he said. "It's all yours." Brian stood there, suitcase in hand, face pale. "Dad, can we just talk about this? Please. Tina's lost her job, the kids are upset, we've got nowhere to go." His voice had none of that old arrogance. I looked at him, really looked, and for a moment I saw the scared little boy who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms. My heart hurt, but I kept my voice steady. "You made your choice, Brian. I gave you everything I had, my trust, my savings, my home. You threw me out like trash. Now you'll see how it feels to stand on your own 2 feet. Tina glared at me. "You're doing this for revenge." I shook my head. "No, Tina. I'm doing this for respect. For myself, and for Joan's memory. You both forgot what that means." They left without another word, climbing into their overstuffed SUV and driving off into the gray Iowa morning. The house was quiet, finally mine again, but it felt more like a museum than a home. Sandra from Walsh Realty arrived with a camera crew to take photos for the listing. "Nice bones, Mr. Bennett," she said, inspecting the kitchen. "This will sell fast." As she worked, I wandered through the rooms one last time. The paint was scuffed, the carpet a little worn, but every corner held memories. I paused by the window where Joan used to sit with her tea, looking out at the maple tree. For a moment, I let myself feel everything: the loss, the betrayal, the pride, and the strange new freedom that comes from finally standing up for yourself. That night, I had dinner with Charlie at the Legion. We sat at a corner table, just two old men eating meatloaf and sharing stories. You know, Walt, Charlie said, most folks never get the chance to start over at our age. But here you are, with a clean slate. I raised my glass. To new beginnings, then. He grinned. And to not letting anybody treat us like we're done living. I slept well that night for the first time in months. The next morning, Sandra called. You've got 3 offers, Mr. Bennett. All above asking price. When can you come in and sign? I looked around my little apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope of someone waiting to be needed, but the solid hope of a man who knows his own worth. The world hadn't ended when the door closed behind me. It had just opened somewhere else. But there was one thing left to do, and I wasn't about to run from it. Brian and Tina would have to face what they'd done, and so would I. Sometimes forgiveness is the hardest step, but maybe, just maybe, it's the one that sets you free. With the house listed and offers piling up, life started moving faster than I'd expected. For weeks I'd felt invisible, disposable. Now, suddenly, I was the man everyone needed: a seller, a neighbor, even, in a strange way, the father my son had started looking for again. It was late afternoon when Brian showed up at my apartment. I was brewing coffee, halfway through sorting a box of old letters and photographs, when I heard the knock. For a moment, I thought about not answering, about leaving him on the other side of the door the way he'd left me in the cold. But curiosity, and I'll admit a stubborn hope, made me open up. He stood in the hall, hair a mess, shirt wrinkled, eyes ringed with worry. For a second, he was a kid again, the same boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. Dad, he said, voice tight. Can we talk? I let him in. We sat across from each other at my little kitchen table, the one Mrs. King's grandson had hauled up the stairs for me when I moved in. He looked around, taking in the cheap furniture and the lack of clutter, and I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, voice cracking. We were wrong. Tina and we were stressed, we were fighting about money, about the kids. I blamed you for things that weren't your fault. I let her convince me you were just in the way. He looked at his hands, twisting them together like he was praying for forgiveness. It got easier to treat you like a problem instead of my dad. And now I've lost everything. The house, my job, Tina's gone to stay with her sister in Des Moines. The kids are confused. And he swallowed. I don't know what to do. I listened in silence, heart heavy but not angry anymore. I thought about all those nights I'd sat in my room, wondering what I'd done to deserve being thrown out, when really it wasn't about deserving, it was about people forgetting what matters. After a moment I spoke. Brian, I can't fix your mistakes for you. But I can forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to. For Joan, for me, for what family's supposed to mean. He nodded, tears sliding down his face. I miss Mom. I miss the way things used to be. I wish I could take it all back. I reached across the table, rested my hand on his. We can't go back, son. But we can go forward. That starts with being honest, with yourself, with your kids, with me. He nodded again, breathing easier now. Thank you, Dad. I don't expect you to let me back in your life, not after what I did. But I want you to know, I'll do better. I'll be better. He stood, wiping his eyes, and paused at the door. If you ever need anything at all, call me. Please. I watched him walk down the hall, his steps slow but steady. For the first time since this all began, I felt real peace settle over me. It wasn't the ending I dreamed of, but maybe it was the one we both needed. A few days later, Sandra called with the news. The house was under contract, the sale closing in just over a week. I went to the closing alone, signed the papers with a steady hand, and thanked Sandra for her kindness and patience. She handed me the check, more money than I'd ever seen at one time, and smiled. "You did the right thing, Mr. Bennett. Sometimes starting over is the bravest thing a person can do." After the sale, I took a walk through the town that had been my home for so many years. I visited Joan's grave, left a single sunflower on the stone, and sat quietly for a while, talking to her in the way old men do when no one's around to listen. "I did it, Joni," I whispered. "I finally stood up for myself. I hope you'd be proud." Back at my apartment, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching spring rain blur the streetlights. I thought about the years I'd spent giving, about the kindness that sometimes got mistaken for weakness, and about how hard it was to let go of old hurts. But I'd learned something along the way, about boundaries, about dignity, about the power of simply refusing to be erased. And I realized, maybe the best revenge wasn't payback. Maybe it was living well, with my head high and my heart open, even after everything. One more chapter to go. The morning after the house sale went through, I woke to sunlight streaming through the blinds of my little apartment. I made coffee, fried up a couple of eggs, and sat at the kitchen table with the check from the house lying in front of me, a strange symbol of both loss and new beginnings. I looked around my one-bedroom place and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: calm. Not happiness, exactly, but a kind of sturdy peace that comes from weathering a storm and knowing you're still standing. I spent that week settling my affairs, paying off debts, moving the last of my things out of storage, and donating the rest to folks who could use it more than me. I kept Joan's locket, the old Bible, and a battered photo album. Most everything else, I realized, was just weight. I didn't need reminders of being thrown out. I needed space for new memories, whatever they might turn out to be. One afternoon, as I was walking back from the market, I saw a little girl and her mother struggling to fix a flat bike tire outside my building. The girl, maybe 7 years old, freckles, missing front tooth, was sniffling. Her mom looked stressed, fumbling with the pump. Something inside me shifted. I knelt down, offered to help, and within 5 minutes, had the tire fixed and the girl smiling again. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," her mom said. "We don't have anyone handy in the family since my dad passed." I walked inside, heart warm. That small moment reminded me, being useful, being kind, doesn't mean letting people take advantage of you. It means sharing what you've got and knowing where to draw the line. A few days later, Brian called. His voice was steadier than before. "Dad, I got a new job. Not much, but it's a start. The kids are doing better. I'm trying, like you said." "I know you are, Brian. That's all I ever wanted." There was a pause. "I'll be by next week, if you're up for a visit." "I'll be here," I said, and meant it. That Saturday, Charlie and I drove out to the county fair. We watched the kids on the Ferris wheel, ate funnel cake, and told stories. "What now, Walt?" he asked, grinning. "Now? I think I'll travel a little. Maybe see old friends, try fishing up on Lake Superior again, just for me this time." He clapped me on the shoulder. "You've earned it." That night, I sat on my tiny balcony as dusk settled in, listening to the sounds of the town, kids playing, a distant radio, the hush of cars on wet pavement. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone to tell me what to do or where to go. I wasn't anyone's burden or bank account or backup plan. I was just Walter Bennett. Grandpa. Friend. A man who'd lost everything and somehow found himself again. Looking back, it all felt like a strange, hard lesson about love, how easy it is to forget to say thank you. How quickly people can take you for granted, and how important it is to stand your ground, even when it hurts. But I didn't hate Brian or Tina, not anymore. I hoped they'd learn too. I hope they'd treat their own children better, remember what family means. And if they ever truly needed me, not for money, but for love or advice, I'd be there. I wasn't closing the door, just moving on. As the sun slipped behind the rooftops, I felt Joan close by, her laughter in the wind, her hope in my heart. I raised a glass of iced tea to the quiet sky and whispered, "We did okay, Joni. I finally learned to say enough. But I never stopped loving. Somewhere down the road, there will be new stories, new friends, maybe even a little more forgiveness. I'm not sure where I'll end up, but for the first time in years, I know I'll get there on my own terms. That's what freedom feels like. And if you ever drive through Cedar Falls and see an old man fishing at dawn, tip your hat and say hello. You never know, he just might have a story worth hearing."